Jason Momoa, the famed action hero, was known for his towering presence, rugged good looks, and the kind of charisma that could make a room go silent the moment he entered. Yet, there he stood in the modest, dimly lit kitchen of a small Italian restaurant in the heart of Venice, far from the dazzling sets of Hollywood blockbusters. The air was thick with the scent of garlic and fresh basil, the sound of sizzling oil, and the clatter of knives against cutting boards. This wasn't the life he had dreamed of, but it was the life he had chosen. Jason had been a chef for as long as he could remember. His passion for cooking had started young, not in the kitchens of gourmet restaurants, but in his mother's kitchen back in Hawaii. She had taught him everything: how to balance flavors, how to respect ingredients, how to tell a story through food. But after the fame and the lights of Hollywood had faded, after the big roles dried up and the offers grew scarce, he found himself in Venice, working quietly behind the scenes. It was a world away from the action-packed stunts and paparazzi flashing their cameras. And it felt like 1,000,000 miles away from the man he used to be. But what most people didn't know was that Jason wasn't just any chef. He was a chef with a secret, one that had the potential to change the culinary world as we knew it. As he prepared for the evening rush, slicing tomatoes with an almost surgical precision, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The tension in the kitchen was palpable, as the small team of chefs rushed around him in a frenzy, trying to keep up with the incoming orders. But it wasn't just the usual pre-service jitters. It was something deeper, something dangerous. It started with a phone call. The restaurant's line rang loudly, cutting through the rhythm of the kitchen like a sharp knife. Jason wiped his hands on his apron, his brow furrowing in concentration. He wasn't expecting any calls. His business wasn't the kind that attracted attention. He picked up the phone, his voice a low growl. "Momoa's Kitchen, how can I help you?" There was a long pause on the other end. The voice that finally spoke was calm, controlled, and eerily familiar. "Jason, it's been a while," the voice said, sending a chill down his spine. Jason's grip tightened on the phone as recognition set in. The voice belonged to Dominic Hale, his former partner in crime, a man who had once been the architect of Jason's rapid rise to fame. Hale was a name that Jason had tried to bury, one he had hoped would never resurface. "I heard you've been hiding out," Dominic continued, the amusement in his voice clear. "What's the matter, Jason? Missing the action? Or have you finally realized that cooking is the only thing you're good at?" Jason's jaw clenched. He hadn't thought about Dominic in years, but that name, those memories, came flooding back. The deals. The betrayals. The things he had done, things he regretted. "What do you want?" Jason growled, trying to sound indifferent, though a knot had formed in his stomach. Dominic's voice softened, becoming almost sinister. "I need you, Jason. There's something big coming, and I need your skills. Your culinary skills. I promise you, it'll be worth your while. Think of it as your final act." Jason felt his heart race. He didn't need to hear any more. He knew what Dominic was suggesting. He had seen it before, criminal operations disguised as legitimate businesses. And he knew what it felt like to be a pawn in someone else's game. But there was something about Dominic's tone that made Jason pause. He was being pulled back into a world he had fought so hard to escape. And it was terrifyingly tempting. Before Jason could respond, Dominic hung up. The line went dead, leaving only the sound of Jason's ragged breathing. He stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in his hand. The kitchen noise seemed to fade away as his mind raced, torn between the life he had built in Venice and the dangerous world that was calling him back. The restaurant doors opened, and the first guests of the evening began to trickle in. Jason shook off the lingering tension and forced himself to focus. There was work to do. But in the back of his mind, the thought gnawed at him. Dominic Hale was never one to let go easily. And when the past came knocking, it had a way of getting what it wanted. As the evening progressed, Jason's movements became automatic. Chopping, sautéing, plating. But there was an edge to his every action now. The joy he once felt in the kitchen was slowly being replaced with a gnawing unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet, peaceful life was slipping through his fingers. Then, just as he was placing the final dish for the night on the pass, a sudden crash erupted from the back alley. The sound of glass shattering, followed by shouting. Jason froze, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just an accident. This was a message. He set the plate down on the counter and rushed toward the back door, his mind reeling. What was happening? Who was causing this chaos? When he opened the door, he was met with a scene that almost knocked the wind out of him. A group of men, dressed in black, their faces hidden by masks, were standing around a broken window, their eyes locked onto Jason. One of the men stepped forward, his hand raised in a greeting that felt more like a threat. "We need to talk," he said, his voice muffled by the mask, but the words were unmistakable. Jason felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. This was it. The past had caught up with him. And just like that, his life as a chef, the life he had worked so hard to rebuild, was hanging by a thread. Jason didn't flinch as the masked man stepped closer, but inside, every nerve in his body was screaming to run. He had spent years running from this world, from the shadow that had loomed over him since his Hollywood days. Now, it seemed like that shadow was closing in, slowly suffocating him. "What do you want?" Jason asked again, his voice colder now, more controlled. His fingers gripped the doorframe, his body tense, ready to act at a moment's notice. The calm before the storm was always the most dangerous. He'd learned that the hard way. The man raised a gloved hand, signaling to his companions. Two of them immediately moved, circling Jason, their eyes never leaving him. One of them reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, thick, heavy, and sealed with a dark red wax. "You were supposed to be done, Jason," the man said, his voice almost too calm, too familiar. "But Dominic has a different plan for you." Jason's heart skipped. The name alone was enough to send waves of cold through his veins. He hadn't heard Dominic's name in years, but he knew it was never a sign of good things to come. The man held the envelope out to him, and Jason took it, his fingers brushing the wax seal. The moment they touched the envelope, a surge of memories rushed through him, nightmares that he had locked away, things he had buried deep inside. He tore open the seal, his hands trembling ever so slightly. Inside was a photograph, taken at a distance but clear enough for Jason to see. It was a picture of his mother, her face pale and drawn, standing outside the small house in Hawaii where he grew up. And in the background, a man. A man Jason hadn't seen in over a decade, his father. Jason's chest tightened as the photograph burned into his mind. His mother had always told him his father was dead. That he had died in a car accident when Jason was just a boy. But the photo told a different story. "Your father," the masked man said, his words hanging heavy in the air. "He's alive, Jason. And he's waiting for you." Jason stood motionless for a moment, the weight of the news settling in like a crushing wave. His father, alive? It didn't make sense. His mother had never lied to him. She had always protected him, kept him safe from the dangerous undercurrents of the world that Jason had once been part of. But now, this photo, these men in black, everything about this moment screamed that the past Jason thought he had escaped had been a lie. He turned his gaze back to the man who had spoken, his voice low but filled with a dangerous edge. "What do you want from me?" The man smiled, a cold, calculated smile. "We need you to cook. Only, not in the kitchen anymore. You're going to cook for people who can pay far more than you ever imagined. And you'll do it willingly. Because if you don't, your mother's life will be the price." Jason's heart hammered in his chest. He had thought he was free, that he had built a life of his own, one far removed from the criminal world that had once consumed him. But it seemed that freedom had been an illusion. And now, the stakes were higher than ever. The man nodded to one of his companions, who stepped forward and handed Jason a small black device. It looked harmless, but Jason knew better. This wasn't some simple threat. This was real. "You're going to use this," the man continued. "We'll be watching you. Every move you make. You'll cook, and you'll cook for us. And when the time comes, you'll have no choice but to obey." Jason took the device, his fingers curling around it as the weight of the situation hit him like a punch to the gut. His past, his family, everything he thought he knew, it was all being shattered in an instant. One of the men stepped back, his voice cold as he spoke. "Consider this your first and final warning, Jason. We'll be in touch." And with that, they turned and melted into the shadows, leaving Jason standing alone in the dark alley, the photograph burning a hole in his mind, the device heavy in his hand. He didn't know how long he stood there, staring at the spot where the men had disappeared, but the silence was deafening. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, rage, and fear. His father, alive? What did Dominic Hale have to do with any of this? And why now? The kitchen behind him seemed a world away, but he couldn't ignore the pull. Cooking had always been his escape, his sanctuary. But now, it felt like a cage. The price of freedom had just been raised, and Jason didn't know if he could afford it. He turned back to the restaurant, his legs heavy as he walked through the kitchen doors. The small team of chefs barely noticed him as he passed, lost in their work, unaware of the storm that was raging inside him. He didn't stop to explain. There was no time. Jason moved to his station, hands shaking as he tried to steady himself. The knife in his hand felt too light, almost insignificant. He wasn't preparing food anymore. He was preparing for something far darker. The phone on the counter buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Dominic. "Time's running out, Jason. Get ready. We'll be in touch soon." The hours passed in a blur of frantic chopping and sizzling pans, but Jason couldn't focus. His mind was in overdrive, racing between the haunting image of his father alive and the dark promises that came with it. Every dish he prepared felt like it was pulling him deeper into a web he was struggling to escape. It wasn't just the knife in his hand that felt heavy anymore. It was the weight of everything that had been thrust upon him. The evening wound down, and the last customers filtered out of the restaurant, leaving the kitchen eerily quiet. Jason was alone now. The crew had cleaned up, heading off to their homes, and the silence felt suffocating. He wiped his hands on his apron, the fabric rough against his skin. His mind kept going back to the envelope, the photograph. His father's face. Was it truly him? Jason had buried that part of his life long ago, but now, it was coming back to tear everything apart. He moved to the back office, locking the door behind him. The small space was dimly lit, a single desk cluttered with receipts and old order books. On top of the mess sat the black device, still resting in its place where the man had handed it to him earlier. Jason couldn't bring himself to touch it just yet. The weight of it, the sense of being watched, manipulated, was too much. He leaned back in his chair and stared out the window. Venice, the city that had offered him a chance at peace, now seemed like a dream. The canals, the gondolas, the laughter of tourists, it was all a distant memory. What had seemed like a safe haven was now just another trap. Jason reached for his phone, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through the contacts. There was one name he hadn't spoken to in years, but tonight, he couldn't ignore the need for answers. Mia. She had been his anchor in the chaos of his past, the one person he had trusted implicitly. They had worked together in the early days, before Hollywood, before Dominic. She was a woman who understood the underworld better than anyone, but Jason had cut ties with her after everything went down. She had tried to warn him, but he hadn't listened. Now, he needed her help. He tapped the screen, sending a brief message. "Mia, I need to talk. It's urgent. Can you meet me?" The response came almost instantly. "You better have a damn good reason to drag me back into your mess, Jason. Meet me at the usual place. Midnight." Jason stood up, grabbing his coat. There was no turning back now. If anyone could give him the answers he needed, it was Mia. He had no idea what he was about to walk into, but the stakes were higher than ever. His father, Dominic, his mother's safety, everything was tangled in a web of lies and shadows, and Mia was the only thread left to pull. At midnight, Jason made his way through the narrow streets of Venice, the moonlight casting long shadows against the cobblestone paths. The familiar sights felt alien now, each step taking him closer to an unknown future. The usual place was an old bar near the docks, hidden away from the prying eyes of tourists. It was a dive, a place where people went to drink away their regrets and forget their pasts. And it was where Jason had first met Mia, back when they were both trying to outrun their demons. He pushed open the door, the creaking sound making his stomach tighten. The bar was nearly empty, save for a few figures hunched over their drinks in the corner. Mia was sitting at the back, her dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, her eyes scanning the room with the sharpness of someone who had seen it all. "Jason," she said, her voice low but steady. "You've got some nerve showing up here after all these years." He slid into the seat across from her, the tension between them palpable. Mia had always been a force, fierce, unyielding, but there had been a time when they were inseparable. Before the betrayal, before everything had come crashing down. "I didn't have a choice," Jason replied, his voice hoarse. "Something's wrong, Mia. My father, he's alive. And Dominic's involved." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition passing over her face. "I knew this day would come. You can never outrun the past, Jason. It catches up with you, no matter how far you try to run." She took a slow sip from her glass, as if considering her next words carefully. "You've walked away from the world, but the world doesn't forget. Dominic Hale doesn't forget. And now, he's using you again." Jason leaned in, desperate for answers. "What does this mean, Mia? Why is my father mixed up in all of this? Why now? Why me?" Mia's expression softened for a moment, and she leaned back in her chair, eyes glinting with a mix of concern and something darker, something Jason hadn't seen in her in years. "Because you're the only one who can do it, Jason. You've always been good at what you do, at manipulating people, at being in control. That's why Dominic wants you back. You're not just a chef. You never were." Jason's stomach churned as the weight of her words sank in. "You're telling me this whole thing, this whole life, is just a game to him? That's what I am to Dominic. A pawn." Mia shook her head, her eyes hardening. "No. You're not just a pawn, Jason. You're the key. And if you don't play your part, everything you've worked for will come crashing down. Your mother's life, your freedom, everything." Jason's mind reeled. The life he had built, his safe haven, his sanctuary, was a lie. His past was a noose, tightening around his neck. And no matter how much he tried to escape, the past had its grip on him. Mia stood up, her voice cold as she spoke her final words. "You can't outrun this, Jason. You never could. You're in it now. And there's no way out." As Jason left the bar, the weight of Mia's words echoed in his mind. He had no idea how deep he was in. But there was one thing he was sure of: Dominic Hale was a master manipulator, and Jason was no longer just a man behind a stove. He was a player in a game that could destroy him if he wasn't careful. The storm was coming, and Jason had no choice but to face it head-on. Jason didn't sleep that night. The weight of the conversation with Mia hung heavily on his chest, squeezing the air out of him. Everything he thought he knew about himself, the quiet life he'd built in Venice, the safety of his kitchen, felt like a mirage. Every step he took now, he felt like he was walking deeper into a trap, and he couldn't see a way out. He spent the morning in a haze, staring at the black device on his desk, the one that had come with the promise of Dominic's involvement. The thought of it made his stomach turn. Mia had told him he couldn't outrun this, that he was already in too deep. And as much as he wanted to deny it, a part of him knew she was right. He was entangled in a game that was far bigger than he had ever imagined. By noon, he had no choice but to face the inevitable. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. If he was going to protect his mother, his own life, and the future he had worked so hard to build, he needed to understand exactly what Dominic's plan was. Jason decided to visit an old contact, someone who had been involved in his previous life, someone who might know more about Dominic's operations than anyone else. It was a risky move, one that could very well lead to even more trouble, but Jason had no other choice. The man's name was Luca Ferraro, a former associate of Dominic's, someone who had helped orchestrate some of the more unsavory parts of Jason's rise to fame. Luca had since disappeared into the shadows, but Jason knew where to find him. The address was a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, one that Jason had passed by countless times but never thought to enter. The place had the kind of quiet, unassuming charm that would be the perfect front for someone trying to stay off the radar. As Jason pushed open the door, the bell above it jingled, announcing his presence. The cafe was nearly empty, save for a few elderly patrons sipping their coffee at the far end. At the counter, Luca stood, his back turned as he wiped down a glass. He hadn't changed much, still lean, still sharp-eyed, and still wearing that air of someone who knew exactly what was going on in the world, even if no one else did. Luca glanced up as Jason approached, his expression unreadable. "Jason Momoa," he said, his voice dry and almost amused. "I never thought I'd see you back in this world." Jason didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I need to know everything you can tell me about Dominic Hale. And my father." Luca's eyebrows shot up. "Your father?" You think he's still alive? You're not kidding, are you? Jason slid into the chair across from Luca, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. No. He's alive, and Dominic's involved. I need answers, Luca. What's going on? Why is Dominic using me again? Luca paused, studying Jason for a moment. He looked like he was weighing his options, trying to decide if he should give Jason the truth or keep him in the dark. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. Dominic's been pulling strings for a long time, Jason. But this is bigger than just you. This whole thing, your father's supposed death, Dominic's business, it's all part of a much bigger plan. And you're right in the middle of it. Jason's heart raced. What kind of plan? Luca leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. It's all about control, Jason. Dominic doesn't just want money or power. He wants to manipulate everything. He's been building a network, a way to control key people in influential positions. You were always a part of that, whether you knew it or not. Your cooking, your reputation, everything you've built is a part of the bigger picture. And your father, well, he's been working with Dominic all along. They've been setting this up for years. Jason's mind spun. His father, working with Dominic? It didn't make sense. Everything he had been told, everything he had grown up believing, it was all a lie. You're telling me my father faked his death? That he's been working with Dominic this whole time? Jason's voice cracked as he asked the question, the words barely making sense even as they left his lips. Luca nodded grimly. Your father was never dead, Jason. He was the one who put you on the path to fame, the one who introduced you to Dominic in the first place. They had a plan, and you were always meant to be a part of it. But something went wrong along the way. Your father, he disappeared, and Dominic lost his leverage. So, he had to create a new plan, a way to get you back into the fold. Jason's world was crumbling, piece by piece. His father, his own flesh and blood, had been part of this web of lies and manipulation. And Dominic was using him to complete the puzzle, pulling him back into the chaos of his past. Luca's voice broke through his thoughts. It's not just about you, Jason. Dominic's got plans for other people, too. Big names, influential people. He's been playing the long game, and now he's using you to make sure everything falls into place. Jason leaned back in his chair, his hands trembling. What do I do? How do I stop this? Luca stood up, reaching for a piece of paper from beneath the counter. He slid it over to Jason. You can't stop it, Jason. But you can change the game. You've got leverage. You've got a choice to make, and the time to make it is running out. Jason picked up the paper, his fingers tightening around it. The words on the paper were simple. An address, a time. It was a meeting, a chance to confront Dominic, to take control of his own fate. But as he looked up at Luca, he knew one thing for certain. No matter what choice he made, the game had already begun. And in this world, there was no such thing as an easy escape. Jason didn't waste time. The address on the paper Luca had given him burned in his pocket, a reminder that his fate was in his own hands, or so it seemed. There was something ominous about the meeting. The address was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Venice, a place Jason had never visited but knew all too well from his days in the underworld. It was a place where deals were made, where lives were lost in silence, and where no one left unscathed. By dusk, Jason found himself standing in front of the rusted iron gates, the warehouse looming behind them like a dark sentinel. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and rust. He wasn't sure what he expected, but nothing could have prepared him for what lay inside. As he walked through the gates, his mind raced. What kind of choice was he really making? Could he really confront Dominic Hale and somehow find a way to walk away unscathed? Could he save his mother, save himself, without becoming just another pawn in Dominic's twisted game? The weight of the black device, still in his coat pocket, pressed against his chest like a ticking bomb. The warehouse was silent, except for the sound of Jason's footsteps echoing off the cold concrete floor. The large space was empty, save for a single, dimly lit table in the center. And sitting at that table, as if waiting for him, was Dominic Hale. Jason's breath caught in his throat. Dominic hadn't changed much. He still carried the same air of arrogance, the same predatory smile that made people trust him, just enough to destroy them later. Jason, Dominic said, his voice smooth and measured, like they were old friends catching up. I knew you'd come. I always knew you'd come. Jason's jaw tightened. You've been playing me this whole time, Dominic. My father, my life. None of it was real, was it? Dominic's smile widened. Oh, it was real. But not in the way you think. You've been a part of something bigger than you could ever understand. You just never knew it. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling together. You were always meant to be here, Jason. To finish what your father started. Jason's blood ran cold. My father didn't start anything, Dominic. He lied to me. He faked his death. He used me. All for what? So you could control everything. Dominic's eyes gleamed, and for the first time, Jason saw something close to admiration in them. Control isn't the goal, Jason. Power is. You've always had power, whether you knew it or not. You think cooking is your gift? No. It's much more than that. You're a symbol, Jason. You've been the perfect distraction. The perfect facade. Jason stepped closer, the anger rising inside him. Don't talk to me like I'm a puppet in your little game. I'm not your pawn. Dominic stood, his presence towering over Jason. You were never just a pawn, Jason. You were the key to everything. All the lives you've touched, all the people who trusted you, they're all part of the plan. And now, you're going to make the final decision. You're going to choose. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, each word coming out of Dominic's mouth like a cold knife twisting deeper into his soul. Choose. Choose what? Between what, Dominic? What the hell do you want from me? Dominic smiled, slow and deliberate. I want you to cook, Jason. But not in a kitchen. You're going to cook something much more dangerous than food. You'll prepare a meal for people who have far more to lose than you. And when you do, you'll have the power to change everything. You'll have the power to take down the whole system, or you'll be part of it forever. Jason's mind reeled. He couldn't grasp it. What was Dominic really asking him to do? Was this a test, some twisted game to prove his loyalty? And why did his father have to be part of it? I won't do it, Jason said, his voice trembling with the weight of the decision. I won't be a part of your game. Dominic's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. You already are, Jason. You always have been. And you're running out of time. Jason's fists clenched at his sides. He was trapped. No matter how hard he tried to resist, he could feel the pull of Dominic's influence, the weight of his father's legacy. It wasn't just about cooking, it was about something deeper, something darker that he couldn't yet understand. Dominic stepped closer, his voice low. I gave you a choice, Jason. But now, there's no turning back. And just like that, the air shifted. Jason's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit him. He wasn't here to make a decision. He was here to seal his fate. Dominic wasn't offering him a way out. He was offering him a new role in the very world he had tried to escape. And Jason knew that once he stepped into this world, there was no going back. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, interrupting the tense silence between them. Jason's head snapped to the side as a figure emerged from the shadows, a figure he didn't expect to see. It was Mia. Her presence was like a jolt to Jason's system. How had she gotten here? What was she doing with Dominic? She stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Jason's. Jason, she said, her voice steady but laced with something darker. You don't have to do this. You don't have to be part of this anymore. Jason's pulse quickened. Mia. What the hell is going on? Why are you with him? Mia's gaze shifted to Dominic, and then back to Jason. She took a slow breath before speaking again. Because sometimes, Jason, you have to choose between survival and the truth. Dominic gave me a choice, too. And I chose to stay alive. Jason's world spun. Mia, the one person he thought he could trust, had chosen this path. She had chosen Dominic's world over everything else. Don't listen to her, Jason, Dominic said, his voice cold and final. She's already made her choice. Now it's your turn. Jason stood frozen, caught between the two people he thought he knew better than anyone. The weight of his past, his father's betrayal, the choice he had to make, It all crashed down on him at once. But one thing was certain. The choice wasn't just about what Dominic wanted or what Mia had done. It was about who Jason was now. And if he was ever going to break free, he had to stop playing by their rules. Jason took a deep breath. The power was his now. And it was time to make his move. The tension in the warehouse was suffocating, the air thick with unsaid words and unmade decisions. Jason stood in front of Dominic and Mia, feeling like a man on the edge of a cliff, ready to either leap into the unknown or turn back to the safety of the life he had left behind. But there was no turning back now. The moment he had walked into that warehouse, he had crossed a line, and now the only way forward was through the fire. Mia's eyes softened for a moment as she stepped closer, her voice low. "Jason, I never wanted this for you. I wanted you to be free, but I didn't have a choice. You've never known what it's like to be cornered, to have no way out." Jason's chest tightened. The words felt like a betrayal, but there was something in Mia's eyes that made him hesitate. She wasn't the cold-hearted accomplice he had imagined. She was someone who had been forced into this life, just like him. "I don't want this life either, Mia," Jason said, his voice strained. "But this isn't me. I'm not the man I used to be. I've built something here. I've worked my ass off to get out of that world." Dominic watched them both, his expression a mixture of amusement and impatience. "This is why I always liked you, Jason," he said, his voice oozing with mockery. "You have heart. But heart doesn't get you far in my world. And now, you have a choice. You can join us, be part of something greater, or you can walk away, and watch as everything you care about gets crushed." Jason's mind raced. He had thought about this moment for years, what he would do if he ever faced Dominic again. And now, as he stood in the middle of this grim, unholy place, he realized something. Dominic was no longer his biggest enemy. Mia was no longer his ally. The battle wasn't about who was right or wrong, it was about what Jason was willing to sacrifice. His gaze fell to the black device in his pocket, the weight of it pulling at him like a gravity he couldn't escape. It wasn't just a tool to control him. It was a weapon he could use to flip the game on its head. The question was whether he could take that step, whether he could make the choice to take control of his destiny once and for all. "You're right," Jason said slowly, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "I do have a choice. And this time, I'm making it for me." Mia flinched as if she had been slapped, but Jason didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on Dominic, and the fire that burned in them now was a fire of defiance, not fear. "I won't be your pawn anymore, Dominic. I'm done playing by your rules." Dominic's smile faltered for a moment, but then it returned, colder and sharper. "You think you can walk away from this? You think you can just take your ball and go home?" He shook his head, his voice low and dangerous. "You're too deep in, Jason. You can't escape now. The world's already watching. You're going to do what I want, or I'll make sure that everyone you care about pays the price." Jason's eyes never left Dominic's. The danger in Dominic's words was real, but Jason wasn't afraid. "Not anymore." "I'm not afraid of you, Dominic," Jason said, his voice steady. "And I'm not afraid of the price. If you want to destroy me, you'll have to destroy everything I've worked for. And I'm not going down without a fight." Dominic's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Jason. A huge mistake." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This isn't about you or me. It's bigger than that. This is about control, about power. And you're either with me, or you're in my way." Jason's pulse quickened, the words slicing through him like a blade. The weight of everything, his past, his father, his future, it all pressed in on him, but he refused to let it break him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about redemption. It was about taking back his life. Without warning, Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out the black device. He held it up, meeting Dominic's gaze. "You don't control me," Jason said, his voice a declaration. "Not anymore." Dominic's eyes widened as Jason pressed the button on the device, his thumb slipping easily into place. For a split second, everything went still, and then, the sound of alarms erupted through the warehouse, shrill and deafening. Lights flickered overhead, and the walls seemed to tremble with the force of whatever Jason had just triggered. Dominic's face twisted with fury as he tried to reach for Jason, but it was too late. The device had already done its work. "You've just sealed your fate," Dominic spat, stepping back. "You think you can fight me? You think you can play me? You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Jason. The world will burn, and you'll be the one who lit the match." But Jason didn't flinch. He could feel it now, the rush of control, the surge of power that came with making the right choice, even if it was the hardest one. He wasn't going to be anyone's puppet anymore. Not Dominic's, not anyone's. "I'm not afraid of the fire, Dominic," Jason said, his voice calm, almost detached. "I've been burned before. And I'll rise from the ashes." With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Dominic standing in the chaos he had set in motion. Mia called after him, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and regret, but Jason didn't turn around. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The moment he stepped into his own power. He was done being controlled. Done running from the past. Jason Momoa was finally free. And nothing was going to stop him from taking back his life. The fire raged on in the distance, flames licking the night sky as Jason stumbled through the chaos. His ears were ringing from the blast, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins kept him moving, kept him alive. He couldn't afford to stop. Not now. The explosion had been massive, but it wasn't enough to finish the job. Not by a long shot. Dominic Hale wasn't the kind of man who left things to chance. No, this was a message. A warning. And Jason knew that he was the one being sent a signal. He sprinted toward the shadows of the alleyway, his footsteps barely making a sound as he ducked behind a stack of crates. His heart hammered in his chest, the weight of what had just happened settling on him like a crushing weight. The men in black, Dominic's men, had to be close. They were watching him, waiting for him to make his next move. Jason's fingers trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the black device again. The cold metal of it felt like it was searing into his palm. He had no idea how to use it, but he couldn't afford not to try. His only chance at survival, his only chance at stopping Dominic, was in his hands now. He ran his fingers over the device, desperately searching for something, anything, that could help him. And then, with a faint click, a small screen lit up on the side. The device flickered, and for the briefest moment, Jason thought it had malfunctioned. But then, the words appeared. "System activated. All clear." Jason's heart skipped. What was that supposed to mean? He couldn't stop to analyze it now. The explosion had drawn attention, and the last thing he needed was to get caught in the open. He stuffed the device back into his pocket and sprinted toward the nearby street. As he turned the corner, the sound of sirens reached his ears, followed by the screech of tires. Police. No, it was too early for them to be here. Something else was going on. He ducked into a narrow alley and paused for a moment, gathering his breath. His eyes flicked to the street ahead, his mind racing with possibilities. There was one person he could go to now. One person who might know what to do next. He had no choice. He needed to find Luca Ferraro again. Luca was the only person who could give him the answers, the only one who knew Dominic well enough to help him navigate this treacherous game. Jason didn't hesitate. He turned on his heel and began running, not stopping until he reached the old cafe Luca frequented. The cafe was closed for the night, but Jason knew Luca would be there. He always was. He pushed open the door, the old bell jingling above him. The place was dark and quiet, but he knew Luca would be in the back. He made his way to the small office at the rear of the cafe and knocked once. No answer. Jason hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. Luca sat at the small desk, papers scattered across it. His dark eyes flickered up as Jason stepped into the room, but there was no surprise in Luca's face, just a quiet acceptance. "You're back," Luca said, his voice laced with bitterness. "I thought you'd have more sense than to come back here, Jason. But I should have known." Jason slammed his hand down on the desk, his patience wearing thin. "Tell me what the hell is going on. Why did Dominic blow up that warehouse? Why does he want me? And what's this shipment? What's really going on?" Luca leaned back in his chair, his eyes studying Jason with a calculated intensity. "Dominic's always been about control, Jason. That's what you don't understand. He doesn't want power. He wants the kind of influence that breaks people. You. Your father. Mia. Hell, even me. We're all part of this game, and you've been playing right into it without even realizing it. Jason's mind raced. What do you mean, my father? What does he have to do with this? Luca sighed, leaning forward. Your father was never just some criminal in the background, Jason. He was the first to get close enough to Dominic to understand what he was really after. But Dominic didn't just want to use him, he wanted him to be the face of something bigger. Your father was going to lead the way for a new era, a new kind of power. He faked his death because Dominic couldn't control him anymore. He knew too much. Jason's blood ran cold. Everything he had known about his father, everything he had believed, it was all a lie. But what about me? What's my role in this? Why the hell am I involved in this mess? Luca's eyes darkened, his voice dropping lower. You were never just a chef, Jason. You were always more than that. Dominic used your success to build his empire, to make his moves without anyone realizing he was pulling the strings. You were the perfect cover, a man with a past who could disappear into the shadows. But now, he's using you again to make the final move. This shipment, it's not just any cargo. It's the key to everything. Jason's pulse raced. What is it? What's in that shipment? Luca's eyes shifted away, the silence hanging between them like a thick fog. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy. The shipment contains technology, Jason. Not just any technology. It's the kind of technology that could change everything. It's surveillance, manipulation, ways to control people's lives without them even knowing. Dominic's plan isn't just about money or power. It's about control on a global scale. Jason's world tilted. This wasn't just about crime anymore. This was about the future. The world Dominic had planned to build. How do we stop him? Jason asked, his voice tight. Luca looked at him for a long moment before answering. You have to destroy it. The shipment. Everything in it. If you don't, Dominic will have control of everything. Your family. The world. He'll be untouchable. Jason's mind raced. He couldn't let this happen. Not again. He couldn't let Dominic take everything from him, or from anyone else. He clenched his fists, determination filling him. I'll do it. I'll destroy the shipment. But Dominic won't stop there. We need to hit him where it hurts. Luca nodded slowly, a dark smile creeping onto his lips. You're finally thinking like him. Now, let's figure out how to take him down. Jason felt the weight of his decision settle over him like a dark cloud, but there was no going back now. The plan was in motion, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the surge of purpose he had been missing. Dominic Hale had always been a shadow over his life, but now it was time for Jason to cast his own light. Luca's cafe was quiet, save for the clink of coffee cups and the low murmur of conversation from the few customers who had lingered too long. Jason sat at the back table, his mind still processing the gravity of everything Luca had revealed. The shipment, the technology, it was more than just power. It was domination. It was a world where no one could hide, where every move was monitored and controlled. And Dominic wanted that world for himself. Jason wasn't going to let that happen. We need to move fast, Jason said, his voice low but filled with certainty. If Dominic's plan is to go through with this shipment, we've got to hit him before it leaves port. Luca leaned in, his expression serious. It's not that simple, Jason. Dominic's network is tighter than you think. He's got eyes everywhere. He's always 5 steps ahead. If we're going to take him down, we need leverage. Jason's jaw tightened. Leverage? What kind of leverage? Luca's gaze flickered to the window, scanning the street before speaking. There's something Dominic values more than money. Something he's never let anyone touch. His personal files. His archive. It's not just business, there's personal information in there, too. Secrets. People he's manipulated, deals he's made. If we can get our hands on it, we can destroy him. Jason's mind raced. Where is it? Luca looked at him carefully, as if weighing the decision to even speak the words. In his private estate. It's a fortress. But I've been there before. I know where it's kept. Jason nodded, his resolve hardening. Then let's go. We take that archive, and Dominic loses everything. Luca's eyes flickered with something else, something unreadable. It's not that easy, Jason. Dominic doesn't just trust anyone with his secrets. And getting to that estate isn't just about breaking in. It's about breaking through his defenses. He's got people watching every angle. Jason stood up, ready to leave. Then we do what we have to. We hit him where it hurts. Luca followed him to the door, grabbing a jacket off a nearby chair. You're not getting this, Jason. This is going to get ugly. You can't just waltz in there and expect to take what you want. Jason turned to him, his eyes fierce. I've been running from this for too long, Luca. This ends now. I'm not afraid of Dominic anymore. We go in, we get the files, and we take him down for good. The next few hours felt like a blur. Jason and Luca gathered everything they could, tools, maps, information, anything that would give them an edge. Luca had connections, people who had worked in the shadows for years, and he used those resources to get the intel they needed. It wasn't long before they had everything mapped out. Dominic's estate was a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city, a place that looked more like a palace than a private residence. Security cameras, guards, high walls, everything about the place screamed danger. But none of that mattered to Jason anymore. They arrived under the cover of darkness, the streets eerily empty as they approached the mansion. Jason could feel the tension in the air, a storm ready to break. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. This was personal. Luca motioned for him to follow as they moved past the gates, the estate looming in front of them like a monster in the night. The guards were scattered, but there were more than enough to make things difficult. We'll need to take them out quietly, Luca said, his voice a whisper. One mistake, and we're finished. Jason nodded, his eyes scanning the surroundings. His heart was pounding, but his mind was focused. They had one shot at this, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. They crept through the estate grounds, ducking behind bushes and avoiding the flickering lights of the security cameras. The mansion was massive, but Jason had no doubt they could make it. They had to. There was no other way forward. Finally, they reached the main entrance, an imposing iron door with a keypad and a camera above it. Luca moved quickly, his fingers flying over the keypad. Within seconds, the door clicked open. Jason's breath caught as they stepped inside, the cool air of the mansion wrapping around them. It was like stepping into another world, opulent, dark, and full of secrets. They moved swiftly, past lavish paintings and grand hallways, toward the room where Dominic kept his most valuable possessions. Luca led the way, his movements swift and deliberate. It's just up ahead, he whispered. Stay close. Jason's eyes flicked around, the silence in the mansion eerie. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but there was no turning back now. They reached a door at the end of the hallway, and Luca pressed his ear to it, listening for any signs of movement. We're in, he said quietly. Now we get what we came for. Luca stepped forward and cracked the door open, just enough to peer inside. The room was dark, but Jason could make out the silhouette of a large desk and rows of filing cabinets. This was it. The archive. Jason's pulse quickened. The moment he'd been waiting for was here, but something felt off. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Jason froze, heart hammering in his chest. The door to the room was still slightly ajar, but now they were exposed. He turned to Luca, their eyes locking. The plan was about to go sideways. Jason's breath caught in his throat. The footsteps were getting closer. His eyes darted to the door, then to Luca, who was already moving with quiet urgency, pulling Jason into the shadows. They squeezed behind a large ornate vase, praying the footsteps would pass. The tension was unbearable. Every second felt like a lifetime. Jason's pulse pounded in his ears as the footsteps grew louder. He could feel Luca's breath next to his, steady and controlled. The seconds dragged on, each one an eternity, but then, finally, the footsteps moved past the door. Luca motioned for Jason to follow. Now's our chance. They moved quickly but cautiously, creeping toward the door of the archive room. Jason's mind raced, every instinct telling him that they were moments away from being caught. They couldn't afford any more mistakes. Dominic's men would be back soon, and when they were, they would know exactly where to find them. Luca slipped inside first, his movements swift but silent. Jason followed close behind, his eyes scanning the dark room. The desk in the corner stood tall, its surface cluttered with papers. But it wasn't the desk that caught his attention, it was the safe behind it. A massive steel door, locked tight with a combination. "This is it," Luca whispered, his hand already at the dial of the safe. "This is where he keeps everything. We need to get in there fast." Jason moved to the desk, his eyes flicking over the papers scattered across it. His heart beat faster as he realized just how much was at stake. The files in the safe weren't just about money. They were about power, about destroying everything Dominic had worked for. Jason could feel the weight of that power pressing on him. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Luca was still working on the safe, his fingers dancing over the lock. The seconds felt like hours as Jason kept watch, his ears straining for any sounds that would give away their position. "Got it," Luca muttered, his voice low with relief. The safe door creaked open, and Jason moved quickly to stand beside him. Inside, the archive was laid bare. Documents, files, photographs, they were all there. A lifetime of secrets, lies, and betrayal. Jason's hands shook as he rifled through the papers. This was it. This was what would bring Dominic down. But as Jason pulled out a large folder, his eyes froze on the name printed on the top, Jason Momoa. His stomach dropped. The folder contained detailed records of his life, everything. His childhood, his rise to fame, his connections, his every move in the public eye. But what struck him even harder was the last section, plans for control. Dominic hadn't just been manipulating him, he had been using him as a pawn in a larger game. Jason had been part of this plan for years, long before he even knew it. He felt a sickening realization settle in his chest. His father's involvement, his mother's safety, his escape to Venice, it had all been part of Dominic's twisted vision. Jason had been too close to the fire, and now, the truth was burning him alive. "Jason!" Luca's voice cut through his thoughts. "We don't have time. We need to get out of here." But Jason couldn't look away from the folder in his hands. The weight of everything he had believed, everything he had fought for, was slipping through his fingers. He had been a part of this plan from the beginning. The betrayal ran deeper than he had ever imagined. Jason slammed the folder shut, shoving it into his jacket. "You're right. We have to go." But as he turned toward the door, the sound of heavy footsteps returned, closer this time. Jason's heart pounded in his chest. They had no time left. They couldn't be caught. Not now. Not when they were so close. Luca grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the back exit. "Come on. Move." They sprinted down the hallway, the sound of their footsteps drowned out by the pounding of their hearts. Jason's mind was in overdrive, trying to process the magnitude of what he had just discovered. He wasn't just fighting Dominic anymore. He was fighting for control of his own life, his own future. They reached the back door, but as Luca twisted the handle, a voice rang out behind them. "Stop!" Jason's blood ran cold. It was Dominic's voice. Luca turned to Jason, his face pale. "We can't outrun him. We need to fight back." Jason shook his head. "No. We can't. We get to that car, and we get out. Now." With no time to lose, they bolted for the back alley, racing through the dark streets of Venice. The sound of their pursuers' footsteps echoed in the distance, but Jason didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. They reached the car, and Luca slammed the door shut just as the sound of sirens filled the air. Jason's chest heaved as he looked out the window, watching as the lights of the mansion grew smaller and smaller. But he knew this wasn't over. Dominic would be coming for him. For them. He wasn't going to stop until he had control again. Jason's fingers tightened around the steering wheel as they sped away into the night. The battle wasn't won yet. But it would be. Jason wasn't going to be anyone's puppet anymore. He had the leverage now. And it was time to use it. Jason barely took a breath as Luca drove through the narrow streets of Venice, the tires squealing on the slick pavement as they swerved around corners. The adrenaline was still rushing through his veins, but the weight of the situation hadn't fully hit him yet. He had the files. The truth. Everything that Dominic Hale had carefully crafted for years was now in his hands. But it wasn't just the documents that troubled him, it was the realization of what it all meant. His whole life had been orchestrated like a script he had never read, every move he made, every decision, part of a plan that Dominic had set in motion long before Jason had even known. He leaned back against the seat, his mind spinning as he stared out at the city's darkened skyline. The sound of the car's engine filled the air, but there was an eerie stillness to everything. Dominic was out there, watching. Always watching. Jason could feel it, like a shadow creeping over his every step. "We need to get to a safe place," Luca said, his voice tight. "This isn't over. Dominic will come after us." Jason nodded, his eyes scanning the streets for anything suspicious. "I know. But we've got something he doesn't. We've got leverage. The file. His archive." Luca looked at him, a flicker of disbelief crossing his features. "You're sure you want to do this? You're sure you want to go all in? Because once we make the next move, there's no turning back." Jason's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "There's no turning back, Luca. This ends now. Dominic's been controlling everything for far too long, and I'm done being his pawn." The weight of those words lingered in the air. Jason had said them with conviction, but inside, something twisted. The truth he had uncovered about his own life, about his father's death, and about the role he'd unknowingly played in Dominic's game, he couldn't just ignore that. He couldn't just walk away. But he didn't have time to dwell on it. He had to act. Luca's phone buzzed, cutting through the silence. He glanced at the screen, his face going pale. "It's Dominic," he muttered under his breath, then answered the call. "Yeah." Jason's heart skipped. Was this it? Was Dominic already on to them? He leaned forward, waiting for the conversation to unfold. "Jason." Dominic's voice was smooth, mocking, as if he had all the time in the world. "You really think you can run away with my files and get away with it? Do you think I didn't anticipate this?" Luca's eyes met Jason's, his face filled with a mix of fear and determination. "What does he want?" Jason's grip tightened on the seat. "He knows we have the files." Dominic's voice continued, colder now. "I've played you for years, Jason. Your entire life, your career, your family, was built on my design. And now you think you can just destroy it? You think you can take me down like that? You're a fool." Jason's pulse raced. He had known Dominic wouldn't go down without a fight, but hearing those words, their weight, their venom, made it all the more real. "Give me the files, Jason. Come back to me, and I'll make sure your mother's safe. I'll make sure no one else gets hurt. You can walk away with everything intact," Dominic continued, his voice silky and persuasive, as though he were offering Jason a gift. Jason's fists clenched. His mother. The words hit him harder than anything else had. He knew Dominic was using her as leverage, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. "You've always been good at running, Jason," Dominic said, sensing the hesitation. "But running won't protect you anymore. The people you care about are already in danger. You'll never be safe. Not until you give me what I want." The phone went dead, and Luca tossed it onto the passenger seat. His eyes were hard. What now? Jason's mind was spinning. The choice seemed simple. Give Dominic the files, return to his old life, and maybe protect the people he loved. But the cost of that life was too high. Dominic wouldn't stop. Not now, not ever. "We don't give him the files," Jason said, his voice firm, though the knot in his stomach was tightening. "We use them. We take everything from him." Luca shook his head. "You sure about that? You're talking about destroying everything. His empire, his network. That's no small feat, Jason." Jason didn't hesitate. "It's the only way. Dominic's been pulling the strings for too long. If we don't expose him now, there won't be a way out later." Luca drove them out of the city, heading toward a hidden location where they could lay low and make their next move. As they left Venice behind, the enormity of what they were about to do settled in. It wasn't just about taking down a man, It was about shattering an entire system, an empire built on manipulation and lies. Jason's mind kept replaying the conversation with Dominic. His words, his promises, they were all designed to break him, to make him doubt his choices. But Jason knew better now. He wasn't the man Dominic thought he was anymore. He had a choice. And he was going to take control of his own fate. The night air was thick with tension as they arrived at a small safe house on the outskirts of Venice. A place where they could regroup, plan, and figure out their next steps. Jason stepped out of the car, his body tense but ready. He couldn't afford to look back, couldn't afford to hesitate. There was only one way forward, and that was to burn everything down. "We're going to need a plan," Luca said, walking toward the door. Jason nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "And I've got one. But first, we get to work." Jason barely took a breath as Luca drove through the narrow streets of Venice, the tires squealing on the slick pavement as they swerved around corners. The adrenaline was still rushing through his veins, but the weight of the situation hadn't fully hit him yet. He had the files. The truth. Everything that Dominic Hale had carefully crafted for years was now in his hands. But it wasn't just the documents that troubled him, it was the realization of what it all meant. His whole life had been orchestrated like a script he had never read, every move he made, every decision, part of a plan that Dominic had set in motion long before Jason had even known. He leaned back against the seat, his mind spinning as he stared out at the city's darkened skyline. The sound of the car's engine filled the air, but there was an eerie stillness to everything. Dominic was out there, watching. Always watching. Jason could feel it, like a shadow creeping over his every step. "We need to get to a safe place," Luca said, his voice tight. "This isn't over. Dominic will come after us." Jason nodded, his eyes scanning the streets for anything suspicious. "I know. But we've got something he doesn't. We've got leverage. The file. His archive." Luca looked at him, a flicker of disbelief crossing his features. "You're sure you want to do this? You're sure you want to go all in? Because once we make the next move, there's no turning back." Jason's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "There's no turning back, Luca. This ends now. Dominic's been controlling everything for far too long, and I'm done being his pawn." The weight of those words lingered in the air. Jason had said them with conviction, but inside, something twisted. The truth he had uncovered about his own life, about his father's death, and about the role he'd unknowingly played in Dominic's game, he couldn't just ignore that. He couldn't just walk away. But he didn't have time to dwell on it. He had to act. Luca's phone buzzed, cutting through the silence. He glanced at the screen, his face going pale. "It's Dominic," he muttered under his breath, then answered the call. "Yeah." Jason's heart skipped. Was this it? Was Dominic already on to them? He leaned forward, waiting for the conversation to unfold. "Jason." Dominic's voice was smooth, mocking, as if he had all the time in the world. "You really think you can run away with my files and get away with it? Do you think I didn't anticipate this?" Luca's eyes met Jason's, his face filled with a mix of fear and determination. "What does he want?" Jason's grip tightened on the seat. "He knows we have the files." Dominic's voice continued, colder now. "I've played you for years, Jason. Your entire life, your career, your family, was built on my design. And now you think you can just destroy it? You think you can take me down like that? You're a fool." Jason's pulse raced. He had known Dominic wouldn't go down without a fight, but hearing those words, their weight, their venom, made it all the more real. "Give me the files, Jason. Come back to me, and I'll make sure your mother's safe. I'll make sure no one else gets hurt. You can walk away with everything intact," Dominic continued, his voice silky and persuasive, as though he were offering Jason a gift. Jason's fists clenched. His mother. The words hit him harder than anything else had. He knew Dominic was using her as leverage, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. "You've always been good at running, Jason," Dominic said, sensing the hesitation. "But running won't protect you anymore. The people you care about are already in danger. You'll never be safe. Not until you give me what I want." The phone went dead, and Luca tossed it onto the passenger seat. His eyes were hard. What now? Jason's mind was spinning. The choice seemed simple. Give Dominic the files, return to his old life, and maybe protect the people he loved. But the cost of that life was too high. Dominic wouldn't stop. Not now, not ever. We don't give him the files, Jason said, his voice firm, though the knot in his stomach was tightening. We use them. We take everything from him. Luca shook his head. You sure about that? You're talking about destroying everything. His empire, his network. That's no small feat, Jason. Jason didn't hesitate. It's the only way. Dominic's been pulling the strings for too long. If we don't expose him now, there won't be a way out later. Luca drove them out of the city, heading toward a hidden location where they could lay low and make their next move. As they left Venice behind, the enormity of what they were about to do settled in. It wasn't just about taking down a man, it was about shattering an entire system, an empire built on manipulation and lies. Jason's mind kept replaying the conversation with Dominic. His words, his promises, they were all designed to break him, to make him doubt his choices. But Jason knew better now. He wasn't the man Dominic thought he was anymore. He had a choice. And he was going to take control of his own fate. The night air was thick with tension as they arrived at a small safe house on the outskirts of Venice. A place where they could regroup, plan, and figure out their next steps. Jason stepped out of the car, his body tense but ready. He couldn't afford to look back, couldn't afford to hesitate. There was only one way forward, and that was to burn everything down. We're going to need a plan, Luca said, walking toward the door. Jason nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. And I've got one. But first, we get to work.